last week I put up a video and where I was pretty angry. And let me explain to you why I was pretty angry. So a lot of people say we're milking this Hillbrow thing, and we are to a certain degree milking the Hillbrow thing, because what you guys don't understand is that what I saw there really hammered me hard. For many reasons, a lot of my PTSD got triggered. In other words, the first building we went into, I was with the other oaks. We went into this first building, and the first building I walked into, I remember this one hectic suicide that I saw there, and then we went up this street, and then I remember a shooting incident there, and then we went there, and I remember that, and then we went to another place with another suicide, and there wasn't a place that I could drive around there that I didn't, have a bad memory, if you know what I'm saying. So that got drilled, and put me into a space of, I don't like using the word semi-depression or depression, but really it's there, you drive past these places and you see the stuff, and you remember some of the really, it's weird how your brain just remembers, I guess, what the traumatologists would call trauma, and that's already nearly, Thursday will be 2 weeks ago that we were there, and, but it flipping, I've been rolling in my brain because, I don't know, like I said in the video, I'm an empath, I'm empathetic to people's struggles, And I think that's where I picked up a lot of my trouble in the police, and I think that's what also drove a lot of my choices to, not just, when you pick up drugs for the first time, you don't pick up drugs because you think, oh, this is going to be the cure to all my problems, and it's going to make me forget. You pick up drugs for various reasons. You pick up drugs because of peer pressure, you pick up drugs just to try it out, you're inquisitive, you want to experiment, you pick up drugs after that because you realized you had such a joy when you were on them, but then something starts happening in you where you start realizing on a subconscious level, your brain actually picks it up without consciously telling you that it's able to change a lot of its thinking patterns in terms of it doesn't need to remember. It can protect itself from the trauma that you've experienced in your life. The drugs allow you to protect yourself from that. And it allows you to be someone that you're really not, So where I've always been someone, I know you wouldn't think so, but I promise you, most of my life, I've always been someone who's been into, the more, can I say it, arts? I like music, and I appreciate art, and I like reading, and I like history, and that type of stuff. But on the flip side of that coin, on the same coin, is I'm also flipping exceptionally lazy. That's how I get things done. If you want something done in the shortest possible way, ask a lazy guy. He'll show you the shortest, most efficient way to get something done, because he doesn't want to work at it for hours and hours and hours. He wants to just get it done. And you see it here a lot with a lot of the stuff that gets done here. It gets done sort of half-assed. But, the key is to get it done in the shortest possible time, but still at an acceptable standard, And the acceptable standard was also a problem for me. It was just get it done. So, but addiction allowed me, when I went into the police, and I realized very early in the police that it's a very physical, brutal world. And when I started experimenting with drugs, I already started experimenting with drugs literally within the first year of being in the cops, smoking weed and drinking like a fish and all of that. And then the first thing I ever tried outside of weed was LSD. Someone gave me half a cap, okay? Back then it was called a strawberry. Strawberries was I don't know what it was. The guy said, you want to have a strawberry? I said, hey, I love strawberries, especially with ice cream and chocolate. And I love strawberries. This is not that kind of strawberry. Come with me. And I need to find out now in Hillbrow that oak is subsequently dead. And he was quite a good friend to me. He was a criminal, out and out. Colored guy from Fordsburg. His name was Amin. And but the heart of a lion, a short little oak, but the heart of a lion. He ended up going to jail for killing someone, a drug dealer. He's not the only one I know that ended up doing time for killing a drug dealer. But I found out that he'd passed away. I actually want to go back to that shop and find out how he passed away. I'm very interested to hear. So he gave me a strawberry, and I just flipped and fell in love with that. Taking LSD really allowed me to be someone else, like literally a different person, and that led to other things. That led to mandrax, and that then obviously led to crack. And crack, as you know, once crack, for me, I don't know about you guys, I've asked you before, if you just want to put up your hands, which of you oaks have smoked crack here? Okay, just keep your hands up. I just want to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 oaks, right? 16 oaks. 16 oaks, right? Okay, and for those 16 oaks, out of those 16, how many of you crack was your drug of choice? Not the others, only 3, 4. 4 out of 16, okay? And then, all right, so then out of those 4 oaks, all right, that's weird, eh? The other guys that are left, the other 14 guys, 12 guys, all right? If I can ask you this question, was crack not your first drug, but was it your first hard drug? Or did you try it after your drug of choice? After your drug of choice. So for the majority of you that put your hands up, was your drug of choice a stimulant or was it a suppressant? In other words, was it like crystal meth or was it heroin or Nalpe? Crystal meth, heroin first, and then crack, and then you stuck with heroin. Okay. Both of them every day, but you preferred heroin. All right. Okay, so one out of the whole group still preferred. My best friend who died from heroin was like that. He smoked crack, but his drug of choice was heroin. So the rest of you were already on crystal, eh? And then you tried crack. Okay? I'm going off topic now. I'm just trying to do a little study while we're sitting here. All right? So then, why did you... the other 4, I'm coming back to you, Oaks, all right? The guys that started with crystal and then started smoking crack, why did you stick with crystal? Can someone, more than one of you can answer? Yeah, Mark? The high is longer? All right? Is it as intense? It's cheaper? Withdrawal. What withdrawal? Yeah, that's not withdrawal, right? No, there's no withdrawal from crack and there's no withdrawal from crystal, really. Mentally, sure, I agree with you. Mentally, that need to want to go get more is overwhelming sometimes. But physical acute withdrawal, not really. Unless you're smoking, well, maybe with crystal because of what they put in it, But even the crack now, I'm sure, is the same. But I don't think, you don't have to send someone to a hospital to withdraw. Whereas with heroin and opioids and alcohol, at a bare minimum, you've got to have medical supervision. In other words, you'll see guys that come in here that lie to us, because they sometimes lie to us. Can you believe it? The addicts lie to us? No. Or their families lie to us because they're so desperate to get them into a place, Then they'll tell us, no, he's using coke or crack. Then the oak comes here, we book him in, and it's like then the oak starts doing the cold turkey there, the hippie shake, the Tasmanian devil dance. And we're like, brother, what's going on? I'm withdrawing from what? No, I was shooting 3 bags a day or 10 bags a day. And we're like, then we've got to get him to the doctor, you check us. So, all right. So because it's cheaper and the high lasts longer, right? Okay, fair enough, all right? And you'd already experienced something that's a stimulant, which is crystal, right? For the 4 that smoke crack, okay, this is that whole talk now is trying to get to this point. How long did it take you to get addicted? From the first time you used it till when you couldn't stop? First hit. Second rock. First hit. Second rock. Huh? 4 grams. So if you weren't addicted after the first rock, how did you get to the 4 grams? Whoops. I'll tell you now what happened to me, right? We didn't even call it crack, but we didn't call it rocks, okay, when it started, okay? I found, and I promise you, I was, where was I? I was searching a place, right? And I found a bank bag full of white powder. And at that stage, I was already, like I said, moving with these guys that had already given me LSD and what, right? So I knew these guys knew about drugs, right? And I was joining with them. They were my mates, coloured oaks from Fordsburg, Mayfair, right? Hillbrow. So I found this bag of white powder. And I'd watched the movies, you know. Now, the cop training had told us you never stick your finger in a bag of powder and put it in your mouth, like in the movies, because it could be anthrax. You know what I mean? It could be rat poison. It could be anything. But I was like, oh, well, let me try. And I stuck my finger in and I rubbed it on my teeth and that. And my whole mouth went numb, bro. I felt like I was in a dentist. And it had that medical taste, huh? You know that medical taste when they give you anesthetic and that, right? So I was like, okay, this is something, right? I'm sure it's cocaine. I mean, I figured it out. I watched enough. I watched Boys in the Hood, and I watched New Jack City, and I watched, you know, all these American movies about the crack problem and the drug problem in America. You know, these gangster shows that were out at the time. So I was like, sweet, hey, this must be something. So I jumped in my flipping. No, I still had a bike back then. I jumped, no, did I have a car already? Yes, I had a car already. I jumped in my twin cam and I cruised out to Mayfair because now I wanted to go find out what this was and if I could make any money from it, right? And I stopped there and I knocked on the Oak's door and his mom opened the door. And she said, how's it? I said, yeah, I'm looking for XYZ. Now, I don't want to mention the Oak's name because he's still alive and he's still around and I don't want to put him in the arse, right? So she said, come in. So I said, lekker. And I went in there, and she said, he's not here. Is there something I can help you with? You know, you can wait for him, but he might be about an hour and a half. So I said, I can't really wait an hour and a half. And then I pulled out this bag of powder, and this auntie's eyes, not from shock, from excitement. Her eyes went big from excitement. I said, I found this and I want to know if we can do something with it. You know, I want to know if he wants it. So she said, give it to her. And she said, hey, this is cocaine, boy. I said, yeah, I thought. I said, can he do something with it? And she said, yeah, he can. She said, but while you're waiting, I can show you what we can do with it. She said, can I take some of it? I said, sure. I mean, to me, you know, I was a youngster. I was 21. She said, yeah, no, come here. She took it and she took a tablespoon, bro. She stuck it in there. You know, a tablespoon in there takes out quite a bit of it. She took out a tablespoon and then she started with this chemistry experiment there in front of me. She took a spice bottle, emptied out the spice bottle, cleaned the spice bottle out, put water in the spice bottle, took the tablespoon, poured all the powder in there, and it disappeared. I was like, what are you doing? She said, just relax. Just relax. Then she took a tin off the counter. It says bicarbonate of soda. She took the bicarb out, took a tablespoon, put it in, took the spice bottle, swirled it around. Then she took a pot of water, put the pot of water on the gas stove still, heated it up. It was boiling, and then she put the spice bottle in there in the middle, and then she watched it, and I watched her watching it. And then she picked it up with a cloth lock, and she started swirling it, and looking at it very intently, and then up there, and then looking at it, and I'm like trying to check what she's checking. And then she kept swirling it, and then she took it out, and then she just kept until it cooled down. And as it started cooling down, the next minute there was this crystal, this crystal in the bottom of the bottle. And then she had to break the bottle to get it out because it was such a piece, right? And she said, right, now I'm going to show you something. She said, have you got cigarettes? I said, yes. She says, give me your cigarettes. She took an ashtray. She says, now we're going to do something called freebasing. She said, have you tried freebase? I said, I've never tried cocaine. She said, right. I had, but like in a cigarette and one line maybe. It wasn't something really that appealing to me, but I knew that it was worth money, you understand? And she took it, and then she took the cigarettes in her ashtray. I said, don't smoke them, just let them burn out in the ashtray, right? She let the cigarettes burn out into ash. And then while that was going on, she took a glass and she put about this much water in a glass, took tin foil, pulled it over tight with an elastic band. And on the one side, she made like 20 little holes with a pin. And then on the other side, she made like an opening, right? And she said, right. And she broke a piece of that thing off. And to me, this was fascinating. Right? Fascinating. I was like, what's going on here? And then she said, this is what you're going to do. She took the ash and she put it on the opening, not the opening, on the little holes. And then she put a piece of that crystal on there. And then she lit it. And she smoked. And I watched the smoke go through the glass. And then I wasn't able to talk to her for about 10 minutes. 15 minutes, you know. And then she said, right, do you want to try? And I said, I must try. What do you mean, do I want to try? We can't go through all of this without trying. And then she put a piece on, and I tried, and I blew the piece off, and it went missing. So you must know what happened about a couple of days after that. That thing came into someone's memory. The piece that was lying there somewhere, right? Not my memory. I didn't know what spotting was, but this lady was clearly a world champion. But anyway, she said, all right, this, because she freaked out when I dropped it, okay? And she said, be careful. Now I'm going to do it again, but this time I'll hold the lighter. I said, okay. And I hit that thing. And let me tell you something, guys. Till now, I haven't forgotten that feeling. All right? And I spent almost 20 years of my life trying to repeat that. And I remember as I was flipping, zooming, I looked at my friend Tiens, who was with me, and I said, you got to try this. My exact words were, and I'll never forget, I said, this is what I've been looking for my whole life. Those were my words. This is what I've been looking for my whole life. And many years later, when I found myself on the streets and in and out of rehab, I realized that that is not what I'd been looking for my whole life. I was instantaneously hooked. Instantaneously. I'd never experienced anything like that in my life, right? So I was just interested to check how many of you had a similar experience, like first try, bang, you know? Now think about that. What are your chances of beating something like that? Those of you that smoke crystal, right? I'm talking specifically to stimulant guys, because I tried heroin as well. Hated it. But the first time I tried it, it made me so sick, so violently ill, you know, that when they said, you want to try, I said, I don't even want to try that stuff again. And then my friend, later years, a couple of years later, how many years later would that be? Like 8 years later, I met this guy in rehab who was a heroin addict, and him and I ended up being friends on the outside. Very bad mistake. One of the worst mistakes I've ever made in my life. And he used to shoot. And when I used to check out Oak Shoot, I was like, I'm out. And at the same time as I was now using crack, you know, I was joining at houses of ill repute in the Hillbrow. And I met a couple of prostitutes there that were Welcanol addicts, pink addicts. And although I bumped a lot of pink addicts on the streets of Hillbrow, and they, you know, when I looked at them, I was like, this is what scum looks like, because they were really fail oaks, right? And girls. And then I met these girls, you know, at these brothels, which, to be fair, to be honest with you, I didn't even think of it as a brothel. I thought of it as a jail. And then I would check these chicks going upstairs into the rooms with these older men. And I was like, it took me a while to figure out what was going on there. But anyway, coming from my sheltered background. But anyway, one day I met this girl there, and she said, hey, just come with me, I'm going to my flat. And we chopped all the way down Kotze Street, right to the end there, the Nest Inn that I showed you. Remember the Nest Inn? Right there near the police station. And we went upstairs there, and the next minute this chick whipped off her flip and rods, and I was like, woohoo! I'm in for a thing here. And then she went to lie on the bed and she pulled out the syringe, and the next minute she was shooting the shit into her groin. And then, I was unable to speak to her for the rest of the evening because she was not with us. So I ultimately just got up and left and went back to the jail. You know what I mean? But when I checked the process involved of shooting up, the drawing the blood out, and my boot, I was like, no, okay, I'm never trying that. And then my friend Johnny that used to shoot heroin, same story, that oak used to get so flip and, get so badly anxious when he was going into withdrawal. I've checked that oak sit on a pavement in Hillbrow and scoop the water out of the drain and shoot that, because he's got to have a shot, like cook it up in the teaspoon right there, bro. So, and then he puts a cigarette filter in it. This is to draw out all the impurities. I'm like, my mate, that must be the world's strongest filter. What is that? He was a Gauloise. I said, yeah, I've smoked Gauloise. Those filters don't work that great. But anyway, yes, like it. So, yeah, it wasn't my thing. So I just wanted to know, how many of you got instantly addicted? How many of you that smoke crystal got instantly addicted? Instantly. First try. First hit. Is that before or after you snorted, or did you go straight to the lolly? Injecting. My mate, Sam Johnny, he injected some coke that I got directly from a Colombian that was here in the south. Once. I didn't get it. Someone else got it. But I was with when he got it. And I went back to ESP. I don't know if you actually remember that, Joel. 96 N Street. And Johnny was waiting there. He didn't think I was going to come back, but he was waiting for me. He says, you come right? I said, yeah. He says, give it here. I need a line. I said, sweet. Then I came out of that toilet literally like the Tasmanian devil. Spinning around. I said, where did you get this shit? I said, I got it from these funny-looking Mexican type oaks here. Because they did. They looked like exactly like you imagine a Colombian drug dealer would look. They looked like that. The only thing they needed was the poncho, and the big hat, But it's just going to get more. I said, I doubt it. But he used to shoot up coke, and speedball it with heroin. So, yeah, did you go straight to the needle? Okay, so when you snorted the first time, were you addicted immediately? Is it, eh? Yeah. I stopped snorting coke. The bubbles used to burn my nose. So, and it's hard to get it into a line. Liquid. No, but seriously, this is the point I want to make, right? So how do you fight something like that? How do you come to a place where, you really start thinking, well, I've often said this and I get a lot of flack for it, but I don't care because it's true. Now I've got to measure the way I say it. I want to say it, but I've got to measure the way I say it. All right? If drugs weren't lacquer, who would take them? That's why I'm fascinated by heroin addicts. Because the first time you try it, it's hectic, eh? I think. I don't know many people that didn't get sick. Did you get sick when you tried the first time? Okay, you must sit with Brett. Yeah, you must go sit with Brett. Because you actually like the drug superheroes. You're like the exceptions to the rule, It's like asking a Standard 6 lighty when he smokes his first cigarette and he's green and throwing up. Did you get sick when you started smoking? I got sick when I started smoking cigarettes. You know, I'll never forget my friends' sisters were caught smoking cigarettes by their dad. And he came with a whole flippin' box of Gunstons, but. And he gripped those two little girls, but. And he told them, right, now you two are going to smoke this whole box. I said, cool. He said, no, one after the other. You want to smoke? No, you're going to smoke it. And we were sitting there laughing at them, mate. Those chicks turned the color of these trees in this garden, but green. They were chundering all over the place. But it didn't stop them smoking. You know, it just made them professionals. So, you know, the first cigarette I ever smoked was terrible, you know, terrible. But because I wanted to be part of my group of friends, you know, I persevered and then I became a smoker. But crack cocaine, there was no such thing. LSD, I can honestly say I was never addicted to LSD. I used to take a lot of it, and I would take it whenever I could. Like, I eventually got to a place where I couldn't go to a jail unless I was on a trip. If I didn't have a trip, I didn't go to jail because it was just not fun anymore without it, you know. But we were fortunate in those years in that if there was no stock, there was no stock. You know, it's simple as that. If those oaks didn't have, there were only certain oaks that could get trips, and if they didn't have, you know, there were 3 different oaks in and around the Hillbrow, Joburg area that used to sell trips, and if those oaks didn't have trips, you didn't get. It's as simple as that. So if you didn't have trips, you didn't have trips. Mandrax, Pilla, same thing. Ndanda, I think you oaks call it now. You know, same deal. You know, I smoked Pilla by the flippin', I don't know, 1,000. You know, we used to find, because we were cops, it was part of our beat. You know, we would just go past the Mert eventually. You just tune him, listen here, bro, just give me 10. And I could tune, come on, bro. Hey, give me 10, or we park the police car here for the rest of the day and you sell 0. I could just give us 10 pills, you know. Or many times, many times, you know, we would be tapping around and you'd find a bag full of mandrax. You know, like plenty. It's happened so many times, you know, that it became a common thing. And then every now and then we would even buy some, you know. But when all else failed, you know. But I mean, we used to like tax the dealers, you know. We would go to Bertram's and make them pay us with pills, and we would go to Hillbrow and make them pay us with pills, and we would go to Fordsburg and make those oaks pay us with pills. Even come as far as Ennerdale and make oaks give us pills, you know. So I used to smoke those things. They were like, it was like weed. It was like smoking weed. But never came, like, woke up in the morning and thought, yeah, bro, I've got to get my pills. I've got to, you know, I was with a lot of oaks that were like that. Don't get me wrong, there were people that were severely addicted to those things. But I never had that issue. And I think what, you know, put in inverted commas, what saved me from mandrax was crack. You know, because I was still busy flipping smoking mandrax when we tried this freebasing thing. So, and then like mandrax became like, no thanks, you know. But how do you stop now? How do you stop, you know? And the thing is like this. This is where I want to go, all right? And this is where I started this whole story now. So we go to Hillbrow, we do the whole video. A lot of people have seen it. I go for a little spin on my bike on the public holiday. And I end up at a coffee shop, and there's a couple of people there that I know, and I start chatting to them, and there's some oaks sitting on the sideline there that I don't really know, but they sort of like part of the group. And the oaks chew me ass, bro, you know, and this is where I start getting cheesed off. Look what they've done to Hillbrow. Look at what they've done to Hillbrow. So I'm like, who's they? Let's start with they. You see, because now your mentality is already wrong. Because you're in a us and them mentality, right? Whoever the they is, doesn't matter. Who's they? Yeah, no, this ANC government, these foreigners, blah, blah, blah. Okay, sweet. All right. That's your opinion, lekker. Anyway, I just listen. So then I take out, you know, and to a certain degree, there's truth in it, bro. You understand? You know, there's a certain amount of truth. We've got to understand there's a certain amount of truth in it, right? But people don't want to, that I want to talk about the story that brings us to the truth. You know what I mean? So I'll get it. Yeah, let me while I've got the thought. I was watching Penwell, the Black Pen, the other day, right? And he said this. He says, we're sitting in a situation where we're in a big problem in our country, and there's this massive racial divide, right? And I'm going to speak specifically from the white side of things, right? And he's talking about that as well. And he says, people are saying, we must get over apartheid and just forget about it and move on. Okay? So isn't that what we keep saying? Huh? Is it, eh? All right? Okay, so what I want you to do, those of you that are thinking like that, I want you to get on an aeroplane, okay? And I want you to fly to Israel, all right? And I want you to tell those people there, just forget about the Holocaust. Just don't worry what the Germans and the Nazis did to you. They killed 6 million. Just get on, forget about it, but carry on. Just carry on, bro. Forget about it. Huh? So that's what we're telling Black South Africa. We're telling Black South Africa, listen, it's been like 350 years of subjugation and slavery. Just get over it, but. Really? You know what I mean? I don't think that's fair. I don't. I was one of the guys that used to say that, and I still say, until we start getting over it, and until we start moving on, and until we start seeing each other as South Africans and not different colors of people, which I don't know if that's even possible. Okay? We're going to struggle. But I'm going to take it further. You can't tell people just to forget about it, bro. Because, like I said about this chick that was kidnapped, I spoke to you guys last week. These people grew up and have lived in a different normal to you. You understand? When I grew up in a white suburb, in a place called Sunny Ridge in Primrose in Germiston, right? Now, if you go to Sunny Ridge in Primrose in Germiston now, you'll see it's very different to where I grew up. But you don't have Caspers with oaks in camouflage with big guns keeping 3/4 of the population out of the area anymore. Okay? So we were in this protected environment with our beautiful schools and our lacquer house and our swimming pool and our bicycles and everything that we grew up with, that we thought was normal, right? But just down the road, was a place called Alexander Township, all right? Where there was a different kind of normal there, where police vehicles drove up and down. And if you were out past a certain hour, you were beaten or dogs were set on you. If you were, you couldn't leave your area and come to Sandton and go to the Wimpy. You weren't allowed to do that. If you did do that, you were beaten or the dogs were set on you. If you were walking through CBD Joburg and you needed the toilet, you had to go to a toilet that said blacks, all right? And that toilet was not as nice as the toilet that said whites, because the white toilet had a white porcelain basin and a white porcelain urinal and a white porcelain flippin' beautiful toilet. But on the black side, the toilet was a flippin' like a tin thing, and there was a stainless steel like that basin and some khaki copper tap. And it wasn't kept in the same condition in terms of hygiene as the white side. It's a fact. And you can't argue with me because I lived through it. I saw it. I know that to be true. And even though I didn't understand it at the time, you know what I mean? I thought that was, what's the word? Normal. And it's not normal. You with me? But you can't now say that because your normal was X and other people's normal was Y, that they must just forget about what their normal was because our normal insisted that their normal had to be like that through the barrel of a gun and through law. You with me? We've got to understand that there's what they call genetic trauma. In other words, these oaks that are sitting here, these young oaks here in their 30s, black guys here, and Indian guys and colored guys, right? They grew up in homes, all right, where they heard their grandfathers telling them what the white people and what the police used to do with them. They grew up in homes where they heard their parents telling them that. And they now understand, they see it, they're normal, and the way they see their worldview, which Alan said he's going to start studying now, their worldview is very different to yours and mine. Because, let me tell you something, let me give you this dichotomy, separation. I want to tell you something. When I was a kid, there was no such thing as a white squatter camp. Didn't exist, but there were poor white areas where the government would build. You check these funny little brick houses that you see, these state houses that you check next to the railway lines. And you go to places like Triumph, which used to be Sapphire Town, okay? And what we call Fitas there, Brixton side. And you go check those houses. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, go onto the internet and watch a show called Achter Elke Man. Okay? And you'll see what I'm talking about. These were the poor white areas. This is where the government hid the people that didn't want to graft. The government invented jobs for these people, you know, just to get something, you know. But at a bare minimum, they made them work, okay? But they would do a job, you know, just let me give you an idea. A guy that didn't want to work, that was forced to work, would be given a job where he was put in charge of people of a different race who wanted to work but couldn't reach his position just because they were a different race. It's a fact. Can't get around it. You understand? So it's a different kind of normal, right? So I'm sitting in this group, and there was this one guy in particular that really, you know, if he wasn't with the people that he was with and we were alone, let's say in a bar somewhere, he probably would have ended up catching a flip and combination. You with me? Not because of his views. People are allowed their views. You know, I say this. This is what I say. If people are racist, or people are sexist, or people are misogynist, or people are bigots, you know, whatever they are, allow them to be that. I'm telling you. I'll pick up flack for this, for saying this. Because you're not going to change their mind. Unless now this is where I'm going with this, like you now. If you want to use drugs and you want to be an addict, then I say we should allow you to do that. Until you yourself, through experience, life experience, and perhaps some kind of education, all right, come to your own conclusion that this is wrong. You with me? Yeah. You understand? Same with racists, same with misogynists, same with sexists, same with bigots, same with all these types of people. Understand? You, by forcing people not to be racist, are just perpetuating that racism further. You know, I look at my Russian friend here, okay? He'll be able to tell you better, right? On the one side of Russia, it's called Eastern Europe, but it's actually the Balkan states of Russia, right? Okay? You got Bulgarians, you've got Croats, you got Serbs, you got Romanians. Do the Polish also fall under that? They're more, yeah. But you got these people, right? You want to, Bert said, yeah, you'll even know as well. The two of you will know well, right? Okay? Those people all love each other. They hate each other, but this group, this tribe hates this tribe. That tribe hates that tribe. You know? What was the Bosnia-Herzegovina war? I mean, you know, you had these Serbian guys that went in there and started eliminating the Croats and the Bosnians, and it was a massive, it nearly started the Third World War, that conflict. Okay? Now, what was it about? It was about religion, it was about borders, and it was about ethnic identity. Simple as that, right? Now, you can go there now, and they keep the peace, but they're not mates, right? And you can go tell one group, listen here, you need to start understanding that group. And they'll tell you straight to footsack, but you'll probably catch a beating same time. Now, you'll never change that. You can force them. You can try and force them to love each other. They're not going to. They're not going to. The only way that they will start understanding each other, same as what's going on in Russia now. Russia, Ukraine. All right? You know, there's people in Ukraine that have got family in Russia, and there's Russians in Russia that have got family in Ukraine. For all intents and purposes, they're the same people. But for whatever their reasons are, I'm not an expert on the history of Russia and Ukraine, right? This hatred for one another, this discrepancy has come up, which is now also threatening to turn into a world war, right? Now, let me tell you, they say there's something now. The last time I looked, which was probably about 2 months ago, right? There was 1.4 million people dead on both sides. All right? Same with Gaza, Israel, Palestine, Israel, whatever you want to call it. You know, those people are the same people, but they really are. Their ancestors all come from the same place. They're the same people, but they just have different views on God and the way they want to run their lives. Okay? But they're the same ethnically, they're literally the same people. They have different cultures and so on and so forth. But because of their religion and because of their upbringing and because their parents teach them, those people back then did this and this and this and this to us. Those people back then did this and this and this to us. These kids are grown up, indoctrinated, hating each other. Okay? Same in the Balkan states, and it's happening now in South Africa, bro. Where we as the grown-ups are indoctrinating our children to hate people for things that they don't even know about or were never a part of. I've been to creches and nursery schools, bro, where there's toddlers, bro, and I see little kids of all colors playing with each other. They don't care what color you are, they just want to have a friend, you know? You know what I'm saying? And but then that kid goes home and starts getting indoctrinated with this hatred. I don't want you hanging around with those white kids. I don't want you hanging around with those black kids. I don't want you hanging around with those Indian kids. I don't want you hanging around with those colored kids. You know, they this. You know what they did to us. You know this, that, all the rest. Whatever we tell and indoctrinate our kids with. And then you start creating this divide where kids start looking at each other and thinking, well, you know, we're different and this and that and all the rest. But I promise you, if we were to do an experiment where you weren't allowed to even mention that over a period of, let's say, 50 years, you took 2 families and you weren't even allowed to mention it, I promise you at the end of that, you're going to end up with colored people. Because people are not going to see the difference between black and white. They're really not. They're really not, because they'll grow up without it. You check. And this is what they're doing. This is what they've done now in Ukraine and Russia with this war. They've created 1.4 million families that hate each other even worse because that killed so-and-so and that killed so-and-so, and that's what they did to us. And that thing is just going to perpetuate. Now, how do we solve it? Let me tell you, it's so deeply rooted and so deeply ingrained that I don't know if it will ever be solved. But if you look at it from a purely Christian point of view, right, from a purely Jesus point of view, the only way to solve it is to do exactly what Jesus said. And we've got to try and drive this thought process into people's minds, is to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now, why Jesus would say something like that, the reasons and the interpretations are many, and we can go look at the whole biblical view and and I can give you arguments for and against and all these types of things and the theology and blah, blah, blah. But if you take it at face value, love your neighbor as you love yourself, right? Now, as an addict, this is a very difficult thing to try and conceptualize as an addict, because you are already doing things that harm yourself, to yourself. But the premise in the statement, love your neighbor as you love yourself, is this, is that you will not do to yourself things that will intrinsically harm you. In other words, you will, the standard of thinking would be that you do things to yourself that are beneficial for yourself, right? Okay? Therefore, do the same beneficial things for your neighbor that you would do for yourself. Regardless of who that neighbor is. The Bible doesn't say, do for your Samaritan neighbor what you would do for yourself. Do for your black neighbor what you would do for your white neighbor. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. It doesn't specify who that neighbor is. You understand? Why? Because that's how you draw people into God's love. Okay? But now what happens if, like most of us sitting here, okay, let me tell you my thought process without all the psychological jargon attached, okay? Because that stuff, a lot of it has merit. But let's just eliminate that, okay? For whatever reasons, the majority of people here, because there will be reasons for this statement, you hate yourself. You must hate yourself. Because why would you hurt yourself to the level that you're hurting yourself if you don't hate yourself? You can't say that I'm busy killing myself by this way that I live. I'm busy killing myself with these drugs. I'm busy killing myself with my entire lifestyle that I perpetuate on myself continually because I love myself. You know? You love your child. Hey? Let's say, right? You got a child, you love your child. Oh, I love my child, let me give him a shot of heroin. Does that sound like, you as an addict, does that sound like love to you? Right? So then, I love myself, let me give myself a shot of heroin. It's the same thing. It's the same thing, bro. You're not going to harm something or someone that you love. You love your dog, right? You're going to take the dog that you love, bro, and chuck him in a fire and watch him suffer. Never. What? But yet you do it to yourself, and then, you try and say to yourself, well, I love myself. You don't. You don't. Because if you truly love yourself, I see there's a lot of guys here actually that walk around that pretend to love themselves. They put on this fake persona to make people think that they present a self to the world that is not what is going on inside. Now, a big part of recovery is to present to the world the same person that's living within you, your spiritual man. You with me? Be yourself. Be yourself, bro. It was a big problem in my life. I'm unfortunate in this sense that maybe some of you will find affinity with what I'm going to say now. I've got an extremely vivid imagination. Like sometimes I can imagine things in my mind to the point where they almost seem real. That's why me watching Spider-Man and Superman and all these things, for me, it's like, well, those things are not beyond the scope of reality because I can imagine them to be real, I used to have this recurring dream. It was so real, it was almost tangible, that I could breathe underwater. I was like Aquaman, like that, right? Even though I never knew who Aquaman was. And I would wake up 100% believing that I could breathe underwater because these dreams were so real. And then I would run and dive in the pool as a kid and try and breathe underwater and drown nearly. You know what I mean? But do you understand where I'm coming from? My imagination is very, very real. And through that imagination, I developed this need to try and be things that I was not. And I always try to fit in with whatever crowd I found myself in. I would quickly identify the leaders of the crowd and why people were gravitating towards those leaders of that crowd or group, and then try to be like those oaks. So in the police, the guys that were leading the group, we never looked at our officers as leaders. Unless that officer came from a unit like Kufut or SAP Task Force, or, he had some blood on his hands. Could I say it like that, right? You had to have blood on your hands. And the more blood you had on your hands, the more respect you got. Right? Thank God, though, where I was, okay, there wasn't that much blood to be put on your hands. All right? when considered with the oaks that went up to Angola and oaks that were working in the townships and so on and so forth. It was a culture. Now, I wanted to fit in with that. I wanted to be, when I walked into the police station or the barracks, I wanted to be graded with the especially hardcore good cops. I fitted in, right? Same with bouncing. But that's not who I was. That's not who I was. That's what I became to impress other people. And eventually, your conscience, bro, and that's what I say in my one video, is that you're doing things here, right? So let me put it in these terms for this video. When I was at the barracks and I was a cop, I was a cop. But then I would walk across the street and be with my colored and gangster friends. Then I was colored and a gangster. You understand? And then I would be there, and then I'd be that. Then I'd be a chameleon. So whatever environment I found myself, that's the mask I could put on. I went to Nopert. Bro, you would have thought I was the Pope's personal choice for Christianity. This is what I did. This was my life. This is what I managed to. This was my secret. This was the secret of my success. And I even had high-level intelligence operatives that I wanted to be like as well. That was my ultimate goal, to get into these hit squads, right? That's what I wanted to do, these intelligence-driven, James Bond type deal acts, acts with multiple passports, multiple identities, multiple guns, multiple, that moved in the grey areas of our civilization. That's where I wanted to go. And I had the opportunity of meeting people like this on a couple of occasions. And one day I was doing lines and drinking with a guy like this, and I'll never forget, it was a club called Pearl Harbor in Rosebank. Okay? It was owned by a friend of mine. And this guy said to me, and he's very well known in terms of the apartheid regime, okay? He recently came out of jail after 30 or 40 years, all right? And he said to me, I was having lines and that with this guy. And at that point, he was running brothels and clubs and security rackets while still doing government work, okay? And he told me, I can't understand that these people kicked you out of the police for that crime that you did. I said, well, but it was a pretty hectic crime. You know what I mean? He says, yeah. He says, but you must remember that, I was in prison for murder, and they came and got me out of prison to do the work I do now. So I said, okay, that sounds like a flippant plan. You know what I mean? He says, yeah. He says, because in my view, you like the perfect chameleon. He says, I've never in my life checked a guy that can move with comfort in so many different arenas of society without being detected or exposed as someone that comes from a different sector of society. Obviously, I couldn't go sit in a Shavine and pretend to be a black hawk, you know what I mean? Or go hang out in flipping, I don't know, Orange Farm and convince people I'm a Zulu. But, in terms of other aspects, he says, if I were them, and ultimately this is what they started using me for, is to gather information, you understand? He said, if I were them, I would have looked at what happened there and said, this side can be utilized, but, we're underutilizing him, and this is what has created the problem. Let's move him there and utilize him more efficiently, because a guy that's prepared to go to those lengths to steal a bit of money, can you imagine what lengths he'd be prepared to go to serve our ends and our outcomes? Now, I'm grateful that no one ever thought that, because otherwise I probably also would have ended up doing 100 years. You know what I mean? So, in a way, drugs saved me from that. But it's this ability to wear masks that's holding you back, actually. Because what I found is that when I started, and this is pretty recent, This is not something that's happened years ago. This transition has happened actually since I've been running this rehabilitation center. Is that I've accepted who I am. That's literally what has happened. Is that I've come to a place that, and it's taken years of fighting myself, it's taken years of fighting against the process, that God has been trying to instill in my life to get to this point. And I'm hoping by talking to you about it, it will change your trajectory. Because it doesn't matter how much you fight against it. Your destiny is predetermined, but by forces outside of our control. You understand? So you're going to end up where you're going to end up, no matter how hard you fight against ending up where you're going to end up. You with me? Now, what drugs do, all right, is they make you believe things that aren't real. And this is where there's a lot of you sitting here now. You haven't taken drugs for a couple of months even, all right? But you're still trapped in the unreal thinking, the unrealistic thinking of where you think you're going to end up. But as you get older, like I have now, and you get closer to the point of where you're going to end up, you start realizing, looking back at your life, because now you've got a longer history that you can check, that you can look at and go, you know, I came out of nowhere. All I wanted to be in life, all right, when I hadn't accepted who I was yet, right? I wanted to be a gangster. That's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be Al Capone. I wanted to be Radovan Kretcher. I wanted to be running a crew, and I wanted to be involved in all that stuff, right? But I had to concede that I was unable to be that ruthless, right? Because you've got to be ruthless. But I mean, you literally got to be able to kill your best friend if that's what it takes. That's literally what it takes to be a proper gangster, you know? Where, hey, the cops are coming, there's a chance your friend might, whatever the situation is, and you need to flip and get rid of that. You need to be able to get rid of your best mate, your wife, your dog, whoever, you know, exactly what Robert De Niro says in Heat. He says it 100%. He says, never have anything in your life that you can't walk away from in 30 seconds flat. If you see the heat around the corner. Imagine, bro. Hey? Your kids, whatever you need to get rid of or eliminate, you need to be ruthless enough to do that. In other words, you've got to have literally zero feelings to be a proper gangster. All right? And I realized the only way that I could be that kind of human being was if I was taking drugs. I can't do that without taking drugs. Now, that should have already been my first clue that, hey, that's not who I am. Because if that's who I am and I can operate like that, then what do I need the drugs for? Now, I know people like that are like that don't need to take drugs. But that's clearly not me. That's them. And that's their life. They must make peace with their lives, right? But that's not me. And as I grew in my recovery, and as I started getting older and I started looking at my trajectory going backwards, I realized this is why I keep running into a wall, is because I'm trying to be something and someone that I'm not. God had already earmarked me for God's work. If I knew the date, I'd give you the date. But I remember it, and I was a child, bro. I wasn't even in school, bro. That's how young I was. I remember sitting on my grandmother's bed, and my grandmother sitting down with me with a children's Bible, telling me the story of David and Goliath. But I will never forget it as long as I live. That was the first Bible story ever. And I remember it telling me that the name David means God's special child, God's most loved child. That's what David means, the beloved of God. And I'll never forget that. And I've told you guys this many times. Many years later, I'm sitting in a rehab, and a prophet tells me the exact same words and tells me the exact same story about David and Goliath and tells me that God called me when I was a child already to go and kill giants. That's why if you ever read the tattoo on my arm, it says Giant Slayer. That's where it comes from, but you understand? Now, it's recent history where I've understood what all of this has meant, is that my destiny was already marked as a child. But I just thought it was normal life experiences that have taken me down this road. And like the prophet said to me, a prophetess, her name was Magda, I don't know her surname, in Nopert, she said to me, but before you can slay giants in other people's lives, you have to kill the giants in your own life. Now, what are those giants? Some of them is what I'm talking to you about today. You need to start accepting who you are. You are who you are. Nothing you do can change who you are. You with me? You can make certain changes to yourself. Like, you might think I'm contradicting myself because sometimes I say, yeah, you must change. Yes, you must change. Change to who you are. Because I believe this, that the vast majority of you guys sitting here, if not all of you, all right, are intrinsically good people. Yes, we're all born with sin. Yes, the Bible says we're born because of our genetic predisposition to sin and evil. We're born evil. But that's not your personality. That is your genetic sin thing. This is what drives you to do the bad things that you do. But what you want to try and do is counteract that by coming into contact with your spiritual father, with God, bro, so that you can be what God has destined you to be. Be who you are. You know? Once you become invested in who you are, you'll see a lazy person like myself. When God starts motivating you, you stop being lazy. When God starts motivating you, you stop looking at the things of the world as the motivational factors that drive you. I know for most of you sitting here, if not all of you again, you know, you think money is going to solve your problems. And you want to make money because you think you've got this figure in your mind and you think if you get to that figure and amount of money, then all your problems in life is going to be solved. And I want to say this to you, bro. You're going to get to that. You're going to get to that amount of money. You're going to stay clean just to get to that. And then when you get there, I've got bad news for you. You're going to arrive there in your new Lamborghini Aventador SP at that place that you wanted to arrive, and you're going to be disappointed. You're still going to have your spiritual turmoil. You're still going to have your mental trauma. You're still going to feel not enough. You're still going to feel like when you walk into a room, people are laughing at you. You're still going to feel like that person that you were when you walked into rehab. The only difference is you're going to be in a comfortable place feeling like that. And there's people that learn to accept that. Elizabeth Taylor, the famous actress, married 7 times, billionaire, said this: I'd rather be depressed in the back of a Rolls Royce than happy on a bicycle. Now that's your call. If that's your call, that's your call. But then you're not being who you're supposed to be. And you're going to arrive at a destiny that was predetermined, because there's two actually. There's God's destiny for you, but you have to choose it and accept it. And then there's your own destiny, which, if you look at the way you're living now, you're well on your way to that destiny. That destiny of unhappiness, darkness, you know. And you can be as rich as you want. You know, you look at a guy like Donald Trump, right? What more can that guy achieve? Right? Yet, go watch things like Jordan Peterson, what he has to say about him. And go watch things about, you know, people that understand psychology and that type of thing. And people will tell you that act is very, 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 very unhappy. You know, many people class him as a narcissist. And so with all the success, built half of New York, President of the United States twice. People will tell you, in all likelihood, intrinsically is an unfulfilled person. Beautiful family, all of that. But as a human being, he's unfulfilled. When he needs to, he's a Christian. When he doesn't, you understand what I'm saying? He doesn't know really. With all that he's got, I'm not saying this. I'm saying what I've heard very professional people say. With all that he's got, he still doesn't really know who he is. Mal, eh? All right, so what I wanted to read to you here was, I think it was Matthew, Matthew chapter 8. And you guys can go read it for yourself, right? But the reason I wanted to read it to you was not about the miracle that takes place there. It's about, and this is what really pissed me off about what this guy, I'm ending with what I started with, what this guy said in this coffee shop, right? Is that in the times of the Bible, if you had leprosy, you were a cursed person. Leprosy is a type of, I don't know if it's a virus or a bacteria that chows your skin and your flesh, and eventually, but it's only on your extremities usually, right? And you get sores and all this type of thing. It's 100% curable now, okay, and it's pretty much been eliminated from modern society because of science, right? But back in the day, you were considered unclean. They had what they called leper colonies. If you were found to have leprosy, I mean, some pieces, you guys watched, what's that one show we watch? It's one of these Roman type things where the old man, the father's wrapped in all the, in the bandages and that, and his face is falling off and that. He's got leprosy. It's like King Arthur, one of those shows, right? Leprosy, and the reason they kept him up in the tower is because the family didn't want people to see that he had it. Otherwise, they'd flip and chase him away as being the king, But you were a complete outcast of society. You couldn't go to society. And I think this is why this whole argument between people saying, well, just forget about apartheid, and us as addicts, for me, is tied together in the way we are. Because just as people were outcasts during apartheid, they weren't allowed to be part of the economy, they weren't allowed to be part of anything that society had to offer based on the color of their skin. So now, there's a new apartheid whereby the addicts are considered the lepers of society. The untouchables, don't touch them. And I said this to someone last week, and I want to leave it here. You got to understand, I don't care how you view your addiction in this sense. If you view your addiction from the perspective of you have some kind of mental disorder and you've got a disease that is addiction, that is afflicting you, all right? And that philosophy or that theory is working for you to make you heal and become a better person, then that's what you must adopt, all right? As long as Jesus Christ and the God of this world is the one that is motivating you and helping you conquer your disease, right? We come from a different perspective. We tell you that within this disease that you may or may not have, all right, you have a choice, okay? And we attack it from that perspective. Doesn't matter how bad this disease is, bro. You cannot allow it to grow if you don't pick up the drugs. Now they'll say, but the drugs, and I agree, the drugs is just the symptom of the actual sickness. Now this is all these lack of things that they've added on to charge you more money to get better. Okay? But the reality is if you look back at it, yes, you might have had traumas that happened to you. I didn't. I can't say that, I was traumatized to the point where I took drugs to get rid of the trauma. I took drugs because I wanted to be on a jaw with my friends. And I took drugs like that lady cooking that thing up because it was interesting to me and I wanted to try it. And those things had a massive impact in my life. But I never felt like, I needed to take drugs to escape from any kind of reality, in terms of trauma that had happened to me. I like to make those excuses. Those are great excuses. I told you before. My mother, the police, the this, the that. I grew up in a broken home, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is that, I was able to process that stuff. Even though, like I said to you, I sometimes get a downer because of PTSD or whatever the case may be. I can still process it to a point and drag myself out of it. You with me? Through positive thinking, through reading the Bible, all of that. For me, you have a choice every single day. You either choose to attack the day, live the day, work through the day, not pick up the drugs in the day. And if you have issues in your past that you're dealing with, work through those issues. You have the choice to do it. You with me? So there's those two philosophies, choice and disease, right? Now it's amazing to me, and I'm closing with a statement, that when we can make money off you, you have a disease. Huh? Isn't it amazing? That addiction is a disease if we have to cure you of your disease by bringing you to hospital, right? Then it's a disease. You have a disease. And you'll have this disease forever. You can't get rid of this disease. Can never get better. You can only manage your disease. Same with mental illness. Can never get cured of your mental illness. We have to manage your mental illness with medications and psychiatrists and therapists and counselors for the rest of your life. You're going to be taking out money, giving it to these people to help you manage your disease. All right? Do you want to know how quickly it becomes a choice? Huh? Run out of money. Run out of money and go ask somebody else to help you with your disease. And you'll see how quickly they'll tell you, no, bro, you must make a choice. I don't know if any of you have noticed that in your life. Hey? When you can pay us to cure you or manage you, you can't get cured. When you can pay us to manage your disease, then you got a disease. We'll help you as much as you want. When you run out of money, my brother, you better make a choice to change your life. Have you noticed that? Right? And then on that note, I said in my one video, I want to ask you this question. For guys that were chronic drug addicts, especially, that are sitting here, right? A rehab that costs 30, 40, 80, 100 grand a month, and you don't have medical aid. In other words, your family is not financially okay, that they can afford to pay a medical aid for you. Because for your medical aid to take out 30 grand a month or 40 grand a month, you must be on a relatively good medical aid. You're not on a hospital plan. All right? Okay? Some of these rehabs, I believe, someone said the other day, I was charging 85,000 rand for 30 days. Okay? Now I want to ask you, you as a guy that's standing on the street trying to find 250 rand a day for your lolly or your shot or whatever, right? How are you ever going to get into that rehab? And how many addicts do you know, all right, that are at the bottom end of the addiction scale? In other words, we all start here with something. And then our addiction takes us to the place. And we're all somewhere along this downward trajectory, right? Okay? We've either just started drugs about 2 years ago. We still got a car. We still got tackies, da-da-da-da-da. And so it goes. Now, eventually, you're the guy. I want to go find that guy, by the way. Wake up. That guy in Hillbrow. I want to find that guy, right? Now you're that guy. You're standing on a pavement in Hillbrow, shooting heroin, right? You don't even have enough money for a proper tourniquet, okay? How are you going to get into 100,000 rand a month rehab? So who are those rehabs for? They're not for addicts, but who knows? Who knows? You know? And what about the guy that can't afford to go? And this is what cheesed me off. That guy in that coffee shop tunes, well, that's their problem. And I don't understand why you are so upset about it. It's not like you live there. And it's not like they your people. You know what I mean? They created that problem for themselves. Now, I don't know if he was referring to black people, foreigners, locals, or drug addicts. But I don't really care, because it doesn't matter who he was referring to. I thought it was despicable and disgusting. You understand? And I don't like it. I don't like it. That's my story. Have a fantastic day. Today is Monday.